Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Chair of the World Zionist Organization Board, Mr. Yaakov Chaguel, and all members of the Hanala, the heads of the Jewish Agency, Mr. Mark Wilk, General Doron Almog, and all of the leadership of the Jewish Agency, Mrs. Yifat Ovadia Lusky, Chair of the Kakal, and all members of the various boards. It's a privilege for me to be a member of the board of the World Zionist Organization of the Hanala, and recently taken up the position in recent weeks of the chairman of the Department of Religious Zionist Affairs, of Orthodox Religious Affairs, and to join in this formal capacity is a tremendous zchut. I have the privilege also of being the executive chair of the World Mizrahi Organization with our chairman, Mr. Harvey Blitz, our president, Rabbi Yehi Wasserman, and all the members of our Mizrahi leadership as shlichim of the Jewish people as part of this austere organization. Our co-president, Rabbi Yehi Wasserman, was brought in as a Amit Kavod of the World Zionist Organization. I mention it because our son, Daniel Perez, has been for the last 144 days a captive, a hostage in Gaza. He's an officer and a tank commander. And Rabbi Wasserman, for me, is always a source of strength on many levels because he himself was very badly injured in the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago. He was pulled out of a tank, not by Hamas operatives, terrorists, but by a fellow Jew who saved his life. And many months later, he came out of hospital and walked down the chuppah. So Rabbi Wasserman, you always are a walking example of miracles, and we hope and pray the same thing will happen with our son and all of the other hostages, Bezrat Hashem. It took a long time for my wife and I to make the decision to publicize the picture of our son. He's a soldier, an officer, and for many, many moons we decided to be quiet about it, not to do anything to endanger him. But we reached a conclusion. All the parents of the soldiers, I've just come now from a meeting with the members of the government. Every day we're meeting the families of the soldiers, the male soldiers, with members of the government to plead on behalf of our children. And we decided to publicize his picture along with all the other soldiers because the danger of not speaking about him is more dangerous than speaking about him. Hamas know who they've got. And it's quite incredible what we have to do as Jews to be considered humanitarian. 57 days for Jewish women, Rahman al-Islam, who were raped, to be considered woman enough to be raped. It took so long for our children to be considered humanitarian. Please God, our chayalot will all get out, not as chayalot, as women, but what will be with Jewish men, soldiers? Are they not humanitarian? People who blocked with their very bodies, as both of our sons did, we shall speak about, and thousands of soldiers and civilians, stopping an illegal invasion in 90 different places to protect the lives of their fellow civilians. Who's a human being today? Who's humanitarian? And we are so fearful because our children are the most exposed. My son is a Jewish, white, male, soldier, officer. What you only have to do to be considered a human being with all of those titles. We are so fearful that since Hamas do everything to leave our soldiers to the end, that specifically at this juncture, our children are the most exposed of all of the hostages. We're meeting with Cabinet Minister and heads of the different parties and ministers to plead in behalf of our children. In the Doch Shamgar, it was said there that specifically soldiers should be the first in any hostage deal. Those who were sent by the government on behalf of the people should certainly not be left to the end. We don't wish that our children should come before anybody. No one's blood is redder than anyone else, and I and all the soldiers' parents were particularly happy with the first humanitarian deal, because in international law and the what's accepted in international ethics, civilians, children, women, absolutely come first. But at this juncture today, a further release of partial part of the remaining hostages 90 days later, when Hamas wants to leave the male soldiers to the end, we feel may be a death decree. And we feel very strongly that although the Biden administration has been incredibly supportive of Israel from day one, the president has an election year. No people, like the Jewish people, has a feel for every single human life. Are our children going to be the price for doing war? It's not humanitarian. You got 200 hostages out. So there's 40 male white men who Jews and soldiers. Is that not the price of doing war? Is our son the price of doing war when his only sin was to put his body on the line like thousands of others? 1,200 who lost their lives, as we all know, in the first day. And so many hundreds, almost 240 others subsequently, for wanting to stop. And I don't want to go into the details of what him and his Tsevet did, but I can say that for the hours that they fought, they made sure to put their bodies in their tank in between those invading Israel, to do everything in their power to stop the loss of any Jewish and Israeli life. Our sons, Jonathan and Daniel, are both officers in the Israeli army. We made Aliyah 9.5 years ago from Johannesburg, South Africa. And both of them, after yeshiva and mechina, went to be combat soldiers. They both chose to continue as commanders. They both signed on as officers. October 7th, Simchat Torah, Jonathan is engaged to Galia from Kibbutz Saad and our home in Yad Binyamin. He's a company commander commanding 150 soldiers in their basic training, and he's at home with us. Daniel is a tank commander. He fought to get into tanks after a very bad skiing, wakeboarding accident, where he fought with the army to move his profile up to 72 after operations, and was positioned on October 7th, Simchat Torah, in Nachal Oz base with his crew. By the end of the day, we have 2 injured sons. Jonathan, in having fought for 6 hours on different fronts, injured 100 yards away from where his brother was taken captive, taken hostage, lying in Soroka Hospital with a bullet through his leg, and only by the grace of God was Jonathan able to survive when many of his friends didn't. 300 soldiers lost their lives on the first day, 80 officers, 25 officers of the same rank as my son, most of whom he knew and some very friendly with. The fact that he survived, the fact that he was able to walk down the chuppah 10 days later, limp down the chuppah and dance on one leg at his wedding without his brother, it was an unbelievable miracle, and we are forever grateful to Hashem for the blessing. Daniel wasn't as lucky. We hope he will be going forward. Daniel was missing for 3 weeks, along with 2 other members of his tank. He was then declared presumed taken hostage, and then confirmed taken hostage. Other than blood in and around his tank, which was confirmed as his after 6 weeks, and knowing that he was wounded, thankfully, not a wound which of necessity means a fatal wound. We don't know. We hope and pray it was a light wound. But other than those particular drops of blood, we have no connection with Daniel. The definition was nutak kesher. We have nutak kesher, no connection with our son, for 144 days, which is the same with most of the soldiers. It's always puzzled me why Jewish history is littered with so much blood. Blood, blood, blood. I was given the privilege of naming a child this Shabbat of a family that I don't know that well from Yad Binyamin, but they gave me the zchut of, at the Brit Milah, on Shabbat morning of naming their child, whose name is Yagel Yaakov, that Jacob should rejoice. And I always marvel when saying the bracha, firstly, of how much blood there is. How much blood there is at the first religious ceremony of a young Jewish boy. And then we acknowledge that blood. We say a verse that is often repeated. It's a verse from Yechezkel, the prophet, verse 15, which says, Va'evor alayich, says God, Yechezkel, the prophet, I will pass over this young child who's bleeding, has just been born and forlorn, a female child, it says in Yechezkel 16. Va'evor alayich mitboseset bedamayich, I will pass you and see this child wallowing in her blood, having born forlorn after birth. Va'omar lach, and says Yechezkel in the name of God to the child, even though you are forsaken, va'omar lach bedamayich chayi, va'omar lach bedamayich chayi. Twice we emphasize, yes, you feel forlorn. Yes, you, the Jewish people, is the parable. So often in life, we don't understand why. Suffer so much. No people has suffered as much as the Jewish people, perhaps. There is so much blood in our history. And we initiate the young child in blood, acknowledging the blood. Thank you. And then we sit with these children, our sons and daughters, on Pesach, and we just spill so much wine. The spilling of the wine. If you had a cup of wine and a cup of blood, you wouldn't be able to distinguish between the two. It's a bit gory to spill blood, so we spill wine and drops of wine. And so much of Jewish history is littered with blood, pain, anguish, and suffering. And in the middle of the Haggadah, we say the very same words, Va'evor alayich mitboseset bedamayich, va'omar lach bedamayich chayi. And our sages say that the Jewish people, like a young Jewish child and a human child, is born in blood. Why the repetition of the two types of blood? Because in the merit of two types of blood, the Jewish people prevailed, Dam Hamilah, Brit Milah, and Dam Korban Pesach. Why is there always so much blood? We don't have a good answer to that question, but we do know one thing. There's no people on earth like the Jewish people who, despite their suffering and spilling of blood, remember the spilling of blood through the celebration of wine. Very few things in nature are blood red. Wine, pomegranate juice, blood, very few other things. We take the blood and we drink 4 cups of wine. We acknowledge, we spill. We acknowledge to the young Jewish child that human and Jewish history is not a walk in the park. But no matter what, I always say the one word where there is no room for in Judaism is despair. You don't have to be a follower of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev to know that there's darkness in Judaism. There's pain, there's challenge, there's anguish, there's sometimes unimaginable anguish. I know what I'm going through as a father, running from meeting to meeting, pleading for the case of our children that they should not get left behind and they should be seen at least as the same as all other human beings and all other males. I can't begin to describe to you what my wife is going through. I always say that I did not give birth to Daniel. We're a very sporty family. I always discuss sport with him, discuss the army, discuss leadership. I've never once been concerned what he eats or whether he's cold. Every day in the army, my son doesn't like the cold. My wife is always in touch with him. Daniel, are you warm? Daniel, are you eating? I can see that with all the mothers that I've got to know, many of them, especially the mothers of soldiers, they cannot eat a morsel of bread without thinking what their children are eating. They can't take a lukewarm shower without wondering what their children are going through. I can generally compartmentalize. I try not to think about it because I've never thought about it. And it's easier for me to do that. I don't always succeed. But because, as his father, that's not what I was worried about and concerned about, it's a little easier to compartmentalize. It's almost impossible for a Jewish mother, any mother who gave birth to a child who has such a visceral, deep and intuitive connection to her son, to compartmentalize. No person's pain can be compared to anyone else. We at least have hope. Over 1,400 families and have lost their dearest and have a lifetime to come to terms with loss. We at least have hope. But in the hope is so much anguish, but never, ever despair. And therefore Judaism converts the blood into a cup of wine. We acknowledge it. It's ever present. It is blood red, but it's a celebration of life. It's a celebration of the triumph of life, that we never, ever despair. Darkness, yes. Pain, yes. Bitter herbs, yes. Bechol dor vadorim dimaleinu chaloteinu, yes. But after the bitter herbs, we eat the matzah, and then we have the Korban Pesach, and the ta'am, which stays in our mouth, is not the time of the maror, of the bitterness. It's the time of the celebration of the Korban Pesach, the family Korban. And we drink 4 cups of wine, and we celebrate every stage, because the story of the Jewish people is not one of wallowing in blood and suffering. It's one where we wallow in blood and we say, Va'omar lach, Bedamayich Chayi. Perhaps one of our great poetesses, poets of our nation in recent times, has been Naomi Shemer. She somehow almost prophetically managed to capture the mood of Israel's wars. 3 weeks before the Six-Day War, the return of Yerushalayim, we all know how the anthem of the Jewish people almost naturally became Yerushalayim shel Zahav. We also know that she started writing just before the Yom Kippur War, Yehi, and completed it after the war, and for the first time it was then sung, Yehi. Kol shenevakesh, Yehi. But then, in 2001, in the beginning of the Second Intifada, where so many people were murdered, so many mothers and children together, she wrote another song, which she called Bedamayich Chayi. And in this song, Naomi Shemer wanted to capture, specifically, there was a particular mother who was killed protecting her child, and her daughter said that this image was always in her head. And she wrote this to celebrate the protection of Jewish mothers for their children. And she wrote the song, and I just want to read 1 or 2 words of the song. You'll hear it now. Some of the words where she says of Yehi, she says, Hamilim atikot notnim bikoach. These ancient words give me strength. Hey mozrim li lichyot, they help me to live. Mozrim li tzmoach, to grow. Livro olam yoter yafeh, to create a much better world. She reflects on the rainbow as the keshet, as mevaseret chayim, being a harbinger of love, of life, of tikva, shalom, shalva and chesed. And before I end, I'd just like to listen to this song. It's played so often in Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaShoah. It's captured the mood of the ongoing price that the Jewish people are paying for the ongoing battle with our Palestinian neighbors, that none was as powerful, poignant, painful, and torturous as Simchat Torah. And I just like, this is a few words just to listen to the song. It was sung a number of years ago by children at the school where my children, Yonatan and Daniel, learned in Sfia in Yad Binyamin. And just to reflect for a few moments on Bedamayich Chayi, and then I'd like to just have a concluding comment.
המילים העתיקות נותנות בי כוח, בקולות העתיקים אמצע מרפא.
הם עוזרים לי לחיות, הם עוזרים לי לצמוח, לברוא עולם יותר יפה.
המילים העתיקות נותנות בי כוח, בקולות העתיקים אמצע מרפא. הם עוזרים לי לחיות, הם עוזרים לי לצמוח, לברוא עולם יותר יפה.
ואעבור עלייך בערך, מתבוססת בדמייך, ואומר לך בדמייך חיי.
ואעבור עלייך בערך, מתבוססת בדמייך, ואומר לך בדמייך חיי.
חיי, חיי, בדמייך חיי.
ואומר לך בדמייך חיי.
חיי, חיי, בדמייך חיי.
ואומר לך בדמייך חיי.
I'd like to pay tribute to the Nashim Tzadkaniyot, those righteous women, according to our sages, have always played a role in the redemption of the Jewish people. We'll read about Esther, one of the tragic personalities in Jewish life, and the sacrifices she made and what she did to save her people. Our sages say that in the merit of the righteous woman who believed in life, who brought children into the world, who argued with their husbands that although the despairing and dark servitude in Egypt, we need to believe in life and bring life into the world, and in their merit, according to our sages, did we merit redemption. Yes, our sons and brothers and fathers predominantly are those fighting in Gaza and those falling, but their spouses, their mothers, their grandmothers, the price they pay, sometimes families not seeing each other as miluimnikim for months on end, the incredible Mesirat Nefesh, not only of our fathers and sons, but of our mothers, daughters, and those who are on the home front and on the front together, both in battle and together, represent the spirit of life. We as the Jewish people somehow always convert blood into wine. And also noticed whenever there's blood, the blood of the Brit Milah, the blood of the Korban Pesach, there's always Elijah the prophet. We place the baby on the chair of Elijah in the hope for a better future for our children. We leave a seat open, or we have a cup of wine for Elijah, that ultimately, Yain Levav Enosh Yasamach, wine in the celebration of life, always triumphs over the challenges of life. And I want to end and say that if ever Jewish unity and the covenant of fate that Rav Soloveitchik talks about is more relevant than today, it's hard to find another time. Hamas, with so much pain, so much torture, so much suffering, reminded us, unfortunately, of who we are, that despite our arguments and all the things which divide us, we are one people. We are one people that, yes, we have huge arguments about Jewish destiny, but they should never, ever triumph and trump the challenges of Jewish fate. Before we read about one mitzvah in the Parshat Bo, we wait for 61 chapters in the Torah, and before one command is given to the Jewish people as a collective, we spend the entire book of Bereshit clarifying what does it mean to be part of a family. We are part of a family. God sent one man and one woman on an odyssey, and they had a child. And from that child came another family, and from that child another family. And brothers thought of selling each other. And there's not one generation, our sages say, which has not visited the sin of brothers reaching the conclusion, no matter how righteous or self-righteous they are, that you give up on your fellow family members. And only when that principle of the integrity of the Jewish family, no matter what, was enshrined, do those 70 souls of Bnei Yisrael, all children of Yaakov and his wives, come down to Egypt, and that family becomes a people. And only when that family has been through its, so to speak, baptism of fire, its birth of Bedamayich Chayi, when it's enshrined and entrenched in our DNA that we are a family, does God begin to tell us what exactly he wants from us, in the hope and prayer that no matter what he wants from us and no matter how much it divides us, it should never compromise the integrity of the Jewish family. And in the most painful way, Hamas continue to remind us that we are all part of one family. We're part of one family in Israel. We're part of one family all around the world. What happens to us in Israel is the same fate as all of us around the world. We've all been shocked by these anti-Semitic threats all over the world, perhaps the ongoing painful reminder that we are one people. And Bezrat Hashem, just as on October 7th, despite the pain and the blindness and the difficulty and the torture and the challenge, we perhaps saw our finest hour. Yes, it is true, for those 8 hours, Otef Aza was arguably the most dangerous place in the world. Not arguably. Otef Aza, the Gaza envelope, was the most dangerous place in the world for Jews anywhere since the Shoah. I know that my son, Daniel's tank was overrun at 9:01. I know that the last soldier from Nachal Oz to have connection with her parents was at 9:27. I know that my son Yonatan was the first soldier to enter the base at 1 o'clock, which means from 9:27 in the morning until 1 o'clock, like so many other places, brutal murderers did whatever they wanted, however they wanted, to whoever they wanted. The girls in the Nachal Oz Hamal were gassed and burnt. They were the last soldiers to be identified because it took months to sift through the ashes to find any trace. And yes, that was the most painful day since 1945. But boy, oh boy, did our children, all of our children and civilians, stand up for what it means to defend our homeland and our people with incredible self-sacrifice, without any desire to put themselves first, always serving the people. 300,000 Israelis came back, as we know. Where do we find in the annals of history of people coming to a war zone and not running away? And where do we find in the annals of history a hall of Jewish leaders from all around the world who've come not only for the regular meetings, but also Shakar to Yaakov Chagwell for the Jewish People's Challenge Conference, young and younger people coming together to debate the challenges of the Jewish future. And day in and day out, tens and tens of solidarity groups. I do not believe that in Sinwar Yamach Shemor's wildest nightmares, he ever thought that the Jewish people would respond in one moment by putting our differences aside, would come from all around the world, would be the steel and determination to do everything to bring every one of our hostages back and to ensure that this threat does not exist for the future of the Jewish people. And I don't think he saw thousands and thousands of Jews of all ages. I spoke to a group of high school kids today and have seen young and old of all backgrounds coming and showing that we are one people. And Bezrat Hashem, in the schut, Bezrat Hashem, of all the suffering and the pain, in the schut of the Gvura, the incredible revelation of Jewish self-sacrifice, which will not fall short of the Chashmonaim or any of the great biblical heroes, in the schut of the unity, the love, the empathy, the care and concern, which will hopefully, Be'ezrat Hashem, continue with us post Simchat Torah, that what was before will never be what is after. We will always have the humility, the empathy to deal with each other as family, that the Brit of fate, of Jewish fate, should always trump any other consideration. And Be'ezrat Hashem, in this merit, in this month, the month of celebration of Purim, the month of celebration of the redemption from Egypt, we hope and pray that every one of our 134 hostages, 30-something have been declared dead already, that they all come to Kever Yisrael, that all those who are alive get released miraculously, all of them immediately, that Hashem looks after every single one of our soldiers, all of our families on the front lines, heals the wounded, and ensures, Be'ezrat Hashem, a safer and better world without this evil on our doorstep. And Be'ezrat Hashem, the blood and the self-sacrifice will turn into celebrations of wine, and those who affirm and celebrate life will triumph over those who celebrate death. Yehi, Be'ezrat Hashem, Bedamayich Chayi. Thank you.